that we all want something. We have goals, we have things that we believe are important, but we struggle to focus on them.
Yeah, well, there's a couple different things. I think the first thing is that we hold ourselves back from is we have a lot of fears. And fears, when you really start to dive into them, like, why don't people take action in the first place? And one of the things that pops up for people is fear. Like, there's some sort of fear that pops up for them. And I had a conversation with one of my friends who went and lived with a tribe, a native Brazilian tribe in the middle of Brazil. And so he had to fly into a town, he had to hop on a boat and go for 2 days on a boat in the middle of nowhere. And he started talking to me about these things that he called primal fears and intellectual fears. So like a primal fear is pain or death is attached to it. And we don't really come up with too many primal fears in our life nowadays. Intellectual fear is like what we deal with all day long, which is the fear of rejection, the fear of failure, the fear of not being accepted, the fear of success. We have all these fears, and all of these fears are made up in our minds. Okay, I've identified my fears, and the next thing is, well, how do I overcome these fears? And if it's an intellectual fear, the fears that exist in our minds is you can't overcome something that doesn't exist. And instead of actually taking the action that we need to and focusing on what it is that we want, we take all of our focus and put it towards trying to overcome this fear, when in reality, the fear doesn't even exist in the first place. And so I think the biggest thing for most people is like, the fear is keeping you from focusing. There's also like the identity of who you think you are. And one of my favorite things is challenging who I think I am all the time.
It's not real, but it feels so real.
It feels real, yeah.
Right? Like when someone says like, oh, I'm really scared about what if I get rejected from the job? Or I'm really scared that my partner's gonna leave me. Or I'm really scared that I don't feel good enough or smart enough to make it in whatever field it is. Mm-hmm. Those feel extremely real. How do you process a feeling that feels real?
The amazing thing about being a human, you know, they usually say in any cases, what your biggest strength is also can be your biggest fault. The thing about humans is that we can project our minds into a future that doesn't exist yet. And so what we can do right now is we can sit here, you know, we're in the studio, everything is amazing. We have food, water, shelter, clothing, everything. But if I'm like, as a lot of people do, like if I'm starting a business, right? I can sit here and I can think, well, I really want to start this business. But then I start playing out all of the things that could go wrong, which is what we tend to do. Not what goes right, but what could go wrong. When I project my mind into that future, the crazy part is that my mind and my body are constantly connected. So my brain is sending neuropeptides to my body and creating hormones as if that moment is actually happening right now. And so what happens is we tend to, as humans, as a protection mechanism, we tend to project ourselves into a future that is fearful, that is scary, and that fearful, scary feeling usually keeps us in the exact same place. And so what I always say is like, if I'm going to imagine the worst that could happen, why don't I at least try to see the best that could happen? And so if I'm going to notice myself, the awareness of like, I'm really in a lot of fear right now with starting this business. And I'm going, man, what's the worst that could happen? Well, then I might as well close my eyes and say like, what's the best that could happen? And what would it feel like to start this business and to be able to crack $1 million in a business? And how proud of myself would I be to break $1 million in sales and to be able to build this and travel with my family and provide what I've always wanted to provide. And if I'm gonna feel the feelings of fear, why don't I also just try on feeling the feelings of success and getting there? And so if we notice it's an intellectual fear, the first piece that I always say is there's 3 pieces. There's the awareness of it. Okay, I'm aware that I'm in a state of fear. I need to practice to get myself out of that. Okay, if I notice myself in a state of fear, what's my practice to get myself out of it? Well, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna calm down and take 6 deep breaths, and I'm gonna connect back to my heart, and I'm gonna ask myself, like, what's the best thing that could happen? That's the practice to get myself out of it. And then the last piece is repetition. So it's awareness, it's practice, it's repetition. If I do it over and over and over again, eventually I start to rewire myself. So like one of the things that I found in myself years ago that I didn't like was that I judge people. And I'm like, man, I love people. Like I try to be of service as much as I can, but an immediate thought that will come in my head sometimes is like judgment of somebody that I don't know. And I just judge them. And I was like, I don't like that pattern. I want to change this pattern within myself. It's awareness. I become aware of what I want to change.